The office was buzzing with the usual hum of activity. Phones rang, keyboards clicked, and the faint smell of coffee lingered in the air. But on this particular afternoon, there was something different in the atmosphere, something that made the employees pause for a moment. It started with a casual comment, almost like a joke, from one of the younger workers. He had been practicing martial arts for a few years and carried himself with confidence. He called himself a black belt, and he liked to show off a little, especially when he felt the attention of the room. As he spoke, his eyes wandered to the janitor. The janitor was a quiet man who had been working in the building for many years. He was older than most of the employees and moved with a calm, measured pace. His clothes were simple, and he always had a soft smile that made people feel at ease. He had never drawn attention to himself, and most of the staff barely noticed him unless they needed something cleaned or fixed. Yet today, for some reason, he had caught the black belt's attention. "Hey," the black belt said, leaning casually against a desk, "why don't you come over here? I'm just messing around, but I bet you can't keep up with me in a little sparring match." His tone was playful, but there was a hint of challenge in his voice. The people around him laughed softly, thinking this would be another funny moment, a little show for the office crowd. The janitor paused. He had been sweeping the floor near the break room, a mop in his hands, and a bucket of water at his side. He looked up slowly, his eyes calm and steady. He didn't speak immediately. The silence that followed was almost awkward. Employees glanced at one another, unsure whether he would respond or just ignore the comment as he usually did. Finally, the janitor put down his mop and straightened his back. He was taller than most people realized, but what really stood out was the way he carried himself. His shoulders were relaxed, but there was a quiet strength in the way he stood. He didn't rush, didn't make a scene. He simply walked toward the center of the room with slow, deliberate steps. Each step seemed to make the office a little quieter, as if the walls themselves were paying attention. The black belt's smile wavered for a moment. He had expected a polite refusal, maybe a nervous laugh, or even just a shake of the head. He had not expected this calm, unassuming man to actually consider the challenge. And yet, here he was, moving steadily into the open space. The employees who were nearby began to gather around, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. Some whispered among themselves. "Is he really going to do it?" one person asked. "I thought he was just the janitor." Others shook their heads, unsure what to make of the situation. It was strange, almost surreal, to see someone so quiet and ordinary suddenly take the center of attention in such a commanding way. The black belt raised his eyebrows and adjusted his stance. He had trained for years and had participated in competitions, so he was confident in his abilities. This was supposed to be light-hearted, a little fun. But as he watched the janitor approach, a small, unfamiliar feeling crept into his chest. A sense of curiosity mixed with caution. There was something about the janitor's calm that was unusual. He didn't rush, he didn't hesitate, and he didn't seem nervous at all. The janitor stopped a few feet away. He didn't make a dramatic pose, didn't flex his muscles or shout. He simply stood there, looking at the black belt with eyes that were clear and focused. It was the kind of gaze that made you feel like you were being studied, not in a harsh way, but in a way that quietly measured your intentions. The black belt tried to hide his own surprise. He had faced opponents before, but something about this moment was different. A few employees laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. "This is going to be interesting," one of them said. A phone appeared, and someone started recording, thinking this could be a funny video to share later. But the atmosphere was no longer playful. The air seemed heavier, almost as if everyone could sense that this small moment might turn into something bigger than they expected. The janitor shifted his weight slightly, a subtle movement that went almost unnoticed by most. But to those paying attention, it was a signal that he was ready, that he understood what was happening, and that he was not intimidated. He had lived a long life, had faced challenges that most people could not imagine, and somehow, he had learned patience, control, and quiet confidence. It showed in every motion, every breath, every glance. The black belt took a deep breath. He wanted to maintain his confidence, to show that he was the one in control. He bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, preparing for a playful demonstration. But even as he did, he felt a strange respect forming, a sense that this was not going to be just a simple joke. The janitor stood firm, grounded, and calm. The employees formed a loose circle around them, some leaning against desks, others crouching slightly to get a better view. There was a collective sense of anticipation. Everyone knew that something unusual was about to happen, but no one could guess exactly what it would be. Even the janitor, despite his calm appearance, seemed fully aware of the attention. Yet he did not let it change him. He moved as he always had, quietly and confidently, with no need to prove anything to anyone. The black belt spoke again, this time with a small chuckle. "I hope you're ready," he said. It was meant to be teasing, but there was a small edge of caution in his voice. The janitor nodded slightly, not with arrogance or pride, but with acknowledgement. He was ready, yes, but he did not seek to show off. He was simply present in the moment, aware and steady. The first few seconds were silent. The office seemed to hold its breath. People exchanged glances, unsure what would happen next. Some tried to guess the outcome, imagining a quick, playful skirmish. Others felt a little nervous for the black belt, sensing that he might have underestimated the janitor. The room was no longer just an office, it had become a stage for something unexpected. Then the janitor made a subtle movement, almost imperceptible, but enough to make those watching lean in. He shifted his weight, adjusted his stance, and prepared. The black belt, noticing the change, felt a jolt of realization. This was no ordinary person standing in front of him. The janitor's calm exterior hid years of experience and perhaps skills that went far beyond what anyone in the room could imagine. The tension in the room grew, but it was not uncomfortable. It was a mix of curiosity, anticipation, and respect. Employees held their phones a little tighter, ready to capture the moment, yet uncertain if what they were seeing could be captured by a screen. Some felt a shiver of excitement, a rare moment in an ordinary workday that made them forget about emails, meetings, and deadlines. And then, just as the black belt was about to make the first move, he paused. He looked at the janitor, and in that brief second, he realized something important: appearances can be deceiving. The quiet man in simple clothes, carrying a mop and bucket, had an energy and presence that could not be ignored. Confidence alone was not enough. Skill and experience, combined with calmness and patience, were far more powerful. The janitor, sensing the moment, did not press forward. He waited, allowing the black belt to act first. There was no rush, no need to dominate or prove anything. He simply existed in the space, steady and aware, like a calm lake before a ripple forms. The contrast between the black belt's tension and the janitor's calm was striking, and everyone in the office noticed it. For the employees, this was no longer a simple challenge or joke. It was a lesson unfolding before their eyes, a lesson in humility, patience, and quiet strength. They could feel it, even if they could not fully explain it. The black belt, for all his training and experience, was now in a position he had not anticipated. The janitor, humble and quiet, had already begun to teach without saying a single word. And so, in that ordinary office, with phones quietly recording and employees watching in awe, a simple moment became extraordinary. What had begun as a playful challenge was now a quiet confrontation of character, skill, and respect. The janitor stood ready, calm, and steady, showing that true strength often comes not from showing off, but from quiet confidence and experience. It was a moment that no one in the room would forget, a moment where respect was earned in silence, and where the ordinary became extraordinary simply by being fully present and aware. The office remained still, the quiet hum of the air conditioning the only background noise as everyone watched. Even the usual chatter and laughter had vanished. Employees leaned forward in their chairs, some standing now, trying to get a better view. Phones were held carefully, ready to capture every moment, but even those recording seemed to sense that this wasn't just a fight to be shared online. It was something different, something that demanded attention. The black belt's initial confidence had begun to waver. He had expected an easy demonstration, maybe a few playful moves, and then laughter and applause. But the way the janitor stood, calm yet ready, had already changed the dynamics of the room. There was no showiness in his posture, no exaggerated gestures. He wasn't there to impress anyone, he was there simply because the moment had arrived. And that quiet readiness made the black belt pause. A few of the employees whispered among themselves. "Do you think he's really trained in anything?" one asked. "He looks like he just cleans the floors," said another. But even as they said it, there was a nervous energy creeping into their voices. Something about the janitor's presence was hard to describe. It was as if he carried the weight of experiences that went far beyond what anyone in the office could imagine. The black belt moved first. He launched a simple, playful attack, just a basic jab meant to test the janitor and entertain the crowd. But the janitor was ready. He didn't panic or flinch. Instead, he shifted his weight smoothly, stepping to the side, letting the black belt's motion pass without even needing to block. It was a small movement, but it caught everyone's attention. There was a grace to it, a control that made it look effortless. Gasps rippled through the office. Some employees whispered, "Did you see that?" Others just stared, wide-eyed, unsure if what they had just seen was real. The black belt stopped for a moment, surprised. He had faced opponents before, but this was unlike anything he had encountered. This man, who seemed ordinary in every way, moved with precision and calm that suggested years, maybe decades of experience. The black belt tried again, this time a little more aggressively. He wanted to test the janitor further, to see if he could finally get a reaction. But every move he made was countered effortlessly. Not with brute force, not with flashy tricks, but with perfect timing and understanding. The janitor didn't need to strike hard, he simply used balance, movement, and anticipation. Each of the black belt's attempts was redirected, absorbed, or avoided with subtle skill that left everyone watching in awe. One of the younger employees, barely able to hide their excitement, whispered, "I don't think anyone expected this." Another nodded slowly, eyes wide. It was true. Everyone had assumed the janitor would step aside, laugh it off, maybe even shake hands politely and go back to his work. But what was happening now was far beyond their expectations. It was a demonstration of calmness, skill, and quiet authority. The black belt began to feel his confidence slipping. He had trained in dojos, practiced for years, competed in tournaments, and yet this man, in simple clothes and with no fanfare, was showing him something he had never encountered. He tried to regain control, adjusting his stance, thinking faster, moving quicker. But the janitor was always just a step ahead, not by rushing, but by reading, understanding, and responding. Employees held their breath as the two faced each other. Every subtle movement, the shift of weight, the angle of a hand, the placement of a foot told a story. The janitor didn't attack recklessly, he didn't need to. His movements were economical, efficient, and precise. In a few seconds, it became clear to everyone watching that the janitor was not playing around. He was showing mastery in its purest form. Even the black belt started to notice the lessons hidden in the janitor's movements. There was no anger, no aggression, no need to prove superiority. Every step, every pivot, every block, was calm and controlled. The janitor's body and mind were in harmony, and that made him far more powerful than raw strength alone could ever achieve. The young martial artist realized that skill was more than speed or strength, it was patience, awareness, and discipline. The office had gone silent. Phones were still recording, but the employees had stopped talking. They were no longer spectators of a simple challenge, they were witnesses to a demonstration of mastery and respect. Some felt their hearts racing, not out of fear, but out of admiration. They were seeing someone who had lived a long life, accumulated knowledge, and learned to act with both power and humility. And that knowledge shone through in every precise, effortless movement. A few employees began exchanging glances, quietly impressed. "I think he's trained in martial arts before," one whispered. "I think it's more than that," another replied, "he's lived a life where he had to be ready for anything." The janitor's calm demeanor suggested experiences that went far beyond what they could imagine. Perhaps he had faced challenges that tested more than just his physical skill. Perhaps he had learned lessons that could not be taught in any school or dojo. The black belt tried to regain some footing. He attempted a more complicated move, something he had practiced countless times in training. But the janitor met it effortlessly, guiding the movement aside without aggression, without effort, without any hint of struggle. The black belt's eyes widened, and for the first time, he realized he was not in control. The janitor's calm intelligence was dictating the pace, the flow, and the outcome. The employees could hardly believe what they were seeing. They had expected a light-hearted, maybe even humorous, moment. Instead, they were witnessing a quiet display of skill and wisdom. The janitor moved not to dominate, but to respond perfectly to every action, showing that true mastery often comes without force or pride. The lesson was clear: even without words, humility and calmness could be more powerful than aggression and confidence. Time seemed to stretch as the sparring continued. Every subtle movement was deliberate, every response calculated yet natural. The janitor's breathing was steady, controlled, and almost meditative. His eyes remained focused, not just on the black belt's actions, but on the rhythm of the room, the energy of the space, and the reactions of those watching. It was a lesson not just in martial arts, but in life. Observation, patience, and presence could make all the difference. Even the black belt began to notice something remarkable. It wasn't just the janitor's skill, it was his attitude. He did not mock, he did not seek to humiliate, he did not react with pride. He moved as though the moment itself deserved respect. And in that respect, he found power. The black belt realized that perhaps this quiet man had learned more than he could ever hope to teach in a dojo. The employees' whispers had mostly died down. They were no longer making predictions or joking. They were watching, transfixed. It was clear that this encounter had already changed the way they saw the janitor. He was no longer just a man cleaning floors. He was someone who had earned respect through patience, discipline, and quiet strength. After several minutes, the black belt made a final attempt, a combination of moves he had hoped would surprise or impress. But the janitor responded with calm precision, neutralizing each move without effort, and then gently stepped back, signaling the end of the exchange. There was no dramatic flourish, no exaggerated victory pose. Just a simple, quiet acknowledgement that the challenge was over. The room was silent for a moment, and then a wave of realization passed through the employees. They understood what had just happened. This was not about winning or losing. It was about skill, patience, and respect. The black belt, breathing heavily and clearly humbled, looked at the janitor and nodded. There was a newfound respect in his eyes, a recognition that he had underestimated someone based on appearances. The janitor smiled softly and returned to his work, picking up his mop as though nothing had happened. But the impact of his presence remained. Employees whispered quietly among themselves, still processing what they had seen. Phones lowered, and laughter returned slowly, but now it was mixed with admiration. The janitor had taught a lesson that went far beyond the office walls, a lesson in humility, skill, and quiet power. By the end of the day, stories of the moment had already begun to circulate. Employees shared the video clips, but they knew that no recording could fully capture the calm authority and skill that the janitor had shown. It was a memory that would linger in their minds, a lesson that could not be taught in books or classes, only witnessed. The black belt, once confident and playful, had been humbled. He understood now that appearances could be deceiving, that skill without humility was empty, and that true mastery came with patience and respect. And the janitor, who had quietly cleaned floors for years, had shown that sometimes, the most extraordinary people are the ones who seem ordinary at first glance. The office had returned to its usual rhythm, at least on the surface. Phones buzzed, keyboards clicked, and printers whirred. But for those who had been near the central area, nothing felt normal anymore. Something had changed in the air, an invisible shift that no one could ignore. It was as if the janitor's quiet display of skill had left a mark not only on the black belt but on everyone who had witnessed it. People whispered softly as they moved about their work, glancing toward the janitor with newfound curiosity and respect. The black belt sat at his desk, replaying the moment in his mind. He had been confident, sure of himself, even a little boastful. But now, he felt a mix of awe and humility. He realized he had underestimated someone who seemed ordinary, someone whose quiet life had given him strength and wisdom far beyond what the young fighter could imagine. The more he thought about it, the more he understood that skill was more than physical ability, it was a combination of patience, awareness, and life experience. Meanwhile, the janitor returned to his tasks as though nothing extraordinary had happened. He pushed his mop across the floor in slow, precise movements, each stroke calm and methodical. To the casual observer, it looked like ordinary cleaning. But for those who had witnessed the sparring, every movement carried a subtle grace, a reminder of the strength and control he had just displayed. It was as if his entire being reflected discipline, even in the simplest of actions. A few of the employees gathered quietly near the break room, discussing the event in hushed tones. "Did you see that?" one whispered. "I can't believe it. He made it look so easy." Another nodded. "It's not just easy, it's controlled. Every movement seems intentional. He wasn't trying to show off. He was teaching, in a way." They exchanged glances, realizing that the janitor had delivered a lesson far more valuable than any classroom or office training session. The black belt finally rose from his desk, moving cautiously toward the janitor. He wanted to acknowledge what had happened, to express his respect. As he approached, he noticed something new. The janitor's calm demeanor had not changed. He was still serene, still composed, still focused on the task at hand. There was no arrogance, no hint of superiority. This quiet humility made the black belt feel even more humbled. He understood that true strength often lies in restraint, not in showing off. The employees watched as the black belt spoke softly to the janitor. I want to thank you," he said, a note of sincerity in his voice. "I underestimated you. You've taught me something important today." The janitor looked up briefly, a gentle smile on his face. He nodded slightly, acknowledging the words without drawing attention to himself. There was no need for applause, no need for recognition. The lesson had been given, and that was enough. As the day continued, more employees came near, curious to speak to the janitor. Some asked questions about his background, wondering where he had learned such skill. But the janitor only smiled and answered politely, never boasting, never revealing too much. He remained the same quiet, respectful person he had always been. Yet in every word and gesture, he left an impression of wisdom, patience, and strength. The black belt returned to his desk, reflecting on what had happened. He thought about his own training, his own confidence, and his own assumptions. He realized that pride and bravado could blind a person, that appearances could be misleading, and that there was always more to learn, no matter how skilled one thought they were. The janitor had shown him that life experience, combined with discipline and humility, could surpass raw strength and technique. Meanwhile, the janitor continued his work, moving through the office with quiet efficiency. Each step seemed deliberate, each action intentional. Employees watched in awe, noticing how he seemed to balance work and life, skill and patience, strength and humility. It was as if he carried an invisible lesson with him, and everyone around him could feel it, even if they could not put it into words. A few younger employees who had previously been dismissive began to change their perspective. They approached the janitor hesitantly, asking for advice on work, life, and even martial arts. The janitor listened carefully, offering guidance in a calm, thoughtful manner. His advice was simple but profound: patience, practice, observation, and respect were far more important than speed, force, or showing off. Those who listened felt inspired, realizing that there was wisdom in simplicity and power in quiet confidence. The black belt, too, began to see the deeper meaning of the encounter. He had learned a valuable lesson in humility and respect. He had assumed that skill alone defined a person, but the janitor had shown him otherwise. Skill was important, yes, but it was the combination of experience, patience, awareness, and humility that made a person truly strong. It was a lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Employees continued to whisper about the event long after it had ended. They shared their impressions, their admiration, and their amazement. Some even joked lightly, saying they would never underestimate someone again, no matter how quiet or ordinary they seemed. The janitor had changed their perception, reminding everyone that appearances could be deceiving and that respect was earned through character and action, not just titles or achievements. By mid-afternoon, the office had settled back into its usual pace, but the atmosphere had subtly shifted. There was a new sense of respect and camaraderie, a quiet understanding that strength came in many forms. The janitor moved through the office, cleaning, organizing, and assisting whenever needed. Each action carried the same calm precision and understated grace that had captivated everyone earlier. He was not seeking attention or recognition, he was simply being himself, and in doing so, he left a lasting impact. The black belt, reflecting on the day, decided to approach his training differently. He realized that arrogance and pride could limit growth, and that learning from those with experience, even those who seemed ordinary, was invaluable. He made a mental note to observe more, listen more, and approach challenges with humility. The janitor had taught him that true mastery was about balance, patience, and awareness, not just skill and strength. As the day drew to a close, the janitor continued his work quietly. The office lights dimmed, and employees began to leave, still talking in small groups about what they had witnessed. The janitor's presence remained, steady and calm, a silent reminder of the lessons he had imparted. His life experience, discipline, and quiet confidence had transformed the office atmosphere, leaving an imprint on everyone who had been present. Even the black belt, who had started the day confident and playful, now felt a profound sense of respect. He understood that the janitor's calm strength was not just about martial arts, it was about life. Patience, observation, humility, and discipline were qualities that could not be learned overnight, and the janitor embodied them all. The young black belt realized that to grow, he would need to adopt these qualities, not just rely on his physical abilities. Employees who had initially thought the challenge would be amusing began to see the value in what had happened. They recognized that they had witnessed something rare, a demonstration of mastery combined with humility, a display of strength balanced by respect. The janitor's actions had taught lessons that went beyond the office walls, inspiring admiration and reflection in everyone who had observed him. As the janitor finished his work and prepared to leave, the office felt different. There was a sense of calm and understanding, a recognition the room remained quiet, a profound silence settling over the office as everyone tried to process what had just happened. The janitor stood in the center of the floor, calm and composed, his mop now resting gently against the wall. The black belt, still breathing heavily, had taken a step back, his eyes wide with disbelief and respect. For the first time, he realized that the display of skill and patience he had just witnessed was far beyond anything he had imagined. Employees who had been watching moments earlier were now frozen, some still holding their phones, some staring with wide eyes. They had all expected a playful little demonstration, maybe a quick laugh or a brief moment of excitement. But what had unfolded before them was something completely different. It was a lesson in humility, discipline, and the power of quiet strength. No one spoke for several seconds, even the hum of the office equipment seemed to have dimmed. Slowly, people began to understand that the janitor had not fought to win or to show off. He had not been aggressive, nor had he sought to dominate anyone. His movements had been controlled, deliberate, and precise, yet they conveyed more than skill, they conveyed wisdom. In the calmness of his posture, the patience in his actions, and the respect in his eyes, everyone saw a reflection of what true mastery really meant. The black belt finally exhaled, running a hand over his face. He looked at the janitor with something he had never felt before in a challenge or match, genuine respect and a touch of humility. I underestimated you," he admitted quietly, almost to himself. There was no pride left in his voice, no need to reclaim status. In that moment, he recognized something important: strength alone was not enough. True strength included patience, control, and the wisdom to know when to act and when to remain calm. The janitor nodded slightly, acknowledging the black belt's words, but without any fanfare. He did not smile triumphantly, he did not boast, and he did not seek praise. To him, the moment had been an ordinary encounter, nothing more. But to the people watching, it had become extraordinary. They began to see the janitor in a completely different light, not as a quiet man who cleaned the floors, but as someone who carried knowledge, experience, and discipline that could not be easily measured or understood. Whispers began to ripple through the office, soft at first, then growing in volume. "Did you see that?" one employee asked. "I can't believe he moved like that," said another. Some shook their heads slowly, still trying to process the reality that a humble janitor had outclassed a trained black belt without even showing aggression. There was awe in the room, mixed with a growing respect for a man who had quietly lived his life with dignity and skill. The black belt, still catching his breath, took a careful step forward. He approached the janitor, not as a challenger, but as someone seeking understanding. I didn't know," he said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. The janitor looked at him with calm eyes, his expression gentle yet firm. He had not intended to teach a lesson or to demonstrate superiority, but the young martial artist had learned one anyway. Respect, he realized, could not be demanded, it had to be earned. The other employees, inspired by the scene, began to cheer quietly, not in mockery or excitement, but in appreciation. They clapped their hands softly, acknowledging the quiet victory that had taken place. Some approached the janitor, asking questions about how he had learned his skills, about his experiences, and about the discipline that had shaped him. But the janitor remained modest. He spoke little, offering simple words and advice, but his calm presence communicated more than any explanation could. For the black belt, the encounter was transformative. He had entered the room confident, ready to show off his abilities and perhaps impress his colleagues. Yet in just a few minutes, he had been humbled and enlightened. He realized that confidence without understanding could easily lead to misjudgment, and that appearances could be misleading. The janitor, who had always been overlooked, had quietly shown everyone that true power often lies beneath the surface, in patience, observation, and self-control. Employees who had been skeptical or amused at the beginning were now full of admiration. They asked the janitor about his past, curious to learn where such skill had come from. The janitor shared a few stories, speaking modestly of his life, training, and experiences, but always with an emphasis on humility and discipline. He talked about patience, the importance of observing before acting, and the value of respect for others. Every word, every gesture, reinforced the lesson that had already been made clear through his movements: mastery is about more than physical skill, it is about character. The atmosphere in the office began to shift. What had started as a playful challenge became a moment of reflection for everyone present. Employees started talking among themselves, not about gossip or office politics, but about the deeper lessons they had witnessed. The janitor's calm demeanor, self-discipline, and silent confidence inspired them. They realized that life itself required the same qualities they had just observed in him: patience, humility, and awareness. The black belt approached the janitor again, kneeling slightly to show respect. "I have a lot to learn," he admitted quietly. "Not just about martial arts, but about how to be calm, controlled, and respectful." The janitor nodded, placing a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder. He didn't offer judgment, only encouragement. In that simple gesture, the black belt understood that learning was ongoing, and that even those who seemed ordinary could teach the most extraordinary lessons. Some employees began to ask if they could learn from the janitor. He agreed, but on his terms. He emphasized practice, discipline, patience, and self-control. No flashy moves or ego-driven demonstrations, only steady, mindful learning. The black belt, humbled and inspired, agreed to follow his guidance, eager to learn not just physical skills, but the mental and emotional discipline that made the janitor so formidable. The office slowly returned to its usual pace, but the energy in the room had changed. The employees who had witnessed the encounter carried with them a renewed sense of respect, not only for the janitor but for the values he had demonstrated. They shared what they had seen with other co-workers, who came to understand that the janitor was no ordinary man. He had become a symbol of quiet power, discipline, and humility. Even days later, employees still talked about the encounter. It had sparked conversations about respect, patience, and personal growth. The black belt reflected constantly on what had happened, realizing that skill alone was not enough. True mastery involved patience, awareness, and the ability to act with integrity and humility. The janitor, without seeking attention, had left a lasting impression that extended far beyond the office walls. The janitor himself returned to his routine, moving through the office with the same quiet grace as always. He cleaned, organized, and maintained the space, but now he did so with an awareness that his colleagues had seen something deeper within him. He didn't boast, he didn't ask for recognition, and he didn't dwell on the attention. His lesson had been taught through action, not words, and that made it far more powerful. Employees began to treat the janitor with newfound respect. They greeted him warmly, listened attentively to his advice, and observed the patience and calm he displayed in every task. He had become a teacher, a mentor, and an example not just in martial arts, but in life itself. And though he never sought praise, the lessons he had imparted continued to ripple quietly through the office, shaping the attitudes, actions, and character of those around him. The black belt, now a student in a new sense, dedicated himself to learning from the janitor. He practiced humility, patience, and observation, understanding that mastery was not just about physical ability, but about the character one developed over a lifetime. The janitor guided him gently, offering wisdom that extended far beyond martial arts. He taught about self-control, respect, and the power of quiet action. The black belt realized that this encounter had changed him forever. And so, what had begun as a playful challenge ended as a moment of transformation. The janitor, with his quiet strength and calm demeanor, had silenced skepticism, disbelief, and casual arrogance. Through his presence, his skill, and his humility, he had left a lasting impact on everyone who witnessed the event. The lesson was simple but profound: true mastery is not measured by outward displays, but by the quiet strength, patience, and respect that one carries within. The day after the unexpected encounter, the office felt different. It wasn't just the usual routine of tasks and meetings that filled the hours. There was a subtle sense of respect, admiration, and curiosity that lingered in the air. Employees moved with a new awareness, not only of their surroundings but of the people around them. Conversations that had once been casual now carried a deeper tone, as everyone reflected on what they had witnessed the day before. The janitor, who had always been quiet and unobtrusive, continued his work as if nothing had changed. He swept the floors, emptied trash bins, and polished surfaces, moving through the office with his usual calm and steady rhythm. Yet there was a new energy around him. People stopped to greet him, to offer a smile or a kind word. Some lingered to ask questions, not just about his work but about the lessons he had demonstrated during the sparring with the black belt. And though he never sought attention, he welcomed the curiosity with patience and humility. The black belt, now fully humbled, approached the janitor with a renewed sense of purpose. He had come to realize that skill alone was not enough, that true mastery required discipline, patience, and respect. He asked the janitor if he could continue learning, not for show or competition, but to understand the deeper lessons of life and martial arts. The janitor agreed, but only in his quiet, gentle way. He emphasized that learning was not about recognition or pride, it was about growth, patience, and self-awareness. Employees watched as the black belt followed the janitor through simple exercises. These were not flashy or competitive, they were focused on observation, control, and understanding. The janitor demonstrated how to move efficiently, how to maintain balance, and how to remain calm in challenging situations. The black belt listened carefully, absorbing every instruction and gesture. His usual confidence had been replaced with a genuine desire to learn, and his admiration for the janitor grew with each passing moment. The office itself seemed to change in response to this new dynamic. Colleagues who had once underestimated the janitor now treated him with respect and consideration. Meetings that had been hurried and distracted became more thoughtful. People began to approach their work with patience and focus, inspired by the calm discipline the janitor embodied. Even small interactions, like offering help to a coworker or listening carefully during conversations, reflected the lessons he had silently taught through his actions. Word of the incident began to spread beyond the office. Other departments and employees who had not witnessed the event firsthand asked about it. Stories circulated about how the janitor, a quiet man who had always gone unnoticed, had humiliated no one but had humbly demonstrated skill, patience, and mastery. Those who heard the story were struck by the idea that extraordinary talent often hides behind ordinary appearances, and that humility can be more impressive than arrogance. The black belt, deeply affected by the experience, reflected on his previous mindset. He had entered the office confident, ready to show off his skill and perhaps earn attention. But he left with a new understanding: appearances can deceive, and real strength is measured not by showiness or dominance, but by the ability to act with calm, controlled skill. The janitor had taught him, without words, that true mastery involved more than physical ability, it involved mental clarity, patience, and integrity. Employees who had watched the encounter replayed the moments in their minds repeatedly. They remembered the subtle movements, the calm expressions, the lack of unnecessary force, and the quiet confidence of the janitor. They discussed what they had seen, analyzing each movement, each gesture, and each lesson embedded in the demonstration. For them, it was no longer just a story of a sparring match, it was a life lesson. They realized that the janitor's patience, humility, and quiet strength were qualities worth emulating in both work and personal life. Over time, the janitor became more than just a caretaker of the office. He became a mentor, a symbol of patience and calmness, and a reminder that respect and skill could exist without boasting or attention-seeking. He guided those who were interested in learning, not just about physical discipline, but about patience, observation, and the importance of inner strength. His lessons were subtle, often unspoken, but deeply impactful. The office began to thrive not only because of productivity but because of the culture of respect, humility, and focus he inspired. The black belt continued to practice under the janitor's guidance. He no longer sought to impress colleagues or compete for recognition. Instead, he practiced quietly, focusing on control, balance, and awareness. Each day, he became more aware of how much he still had to learn not only about martial arts but about life itself. He realized that humility and patience were as valuable as skill, and that respect for others was an essential part of mastery. Other employees, too, began adopting similar lessons in their own ways. Simple acts, like listening attentively during meetings, offering help without expectation of reward, and approaching problems with patience rather than frustration, became more common. The janitor's quiet example had transformed the culture of the office, creating a more thoughtful, considerate, and respectful environment. The impact of his presence was not limited to a single day, it was ongoing, shaping the attitudes and behaviors of everyone around him. Even the black belt's interactions with colleagues changed. He no longer sought to dominate conversations or showcase his abilities. Instead, he observed, listened, and offered help when needed. His respect for the janitor extended to everyone else in the office, as he recognized the value of humility, patience, and thoughtful action. Colleagues noticed the change and were inspired. They too began to reflect on how they approached challenges, how they treated others, and how they measured success. The janitor himself remained humble throughout all the attention. He never sought praise or recognition, never reminded anyone of his skills, and never acted as though he were superior. He continued his work quietly, with the same calm efficiency he had always shown. Yet everyone who had witnessed the sparring knew that he had achieved something extraordinary. Through his actions, he had taught lessons that no textbook could convey and no lecture could replace. Months passed, but the memory of that day lingered. The office had changed in ways that were subtle but meaningful. Employees approached work with greater focus, treated one another with more respect, and valued patience and observation over haste and pride. The janitor had become a symbol, not only of skill but of the power of humility and calm presence. His example continued to inspire, long after the moment of the sparring match had passed. The black belt often reflected on the experience. He realized that he had learned more in those few minutes than he had in years of training and competition. The janitor had shown him that mastery was not about winning or being the fastest or strongest. It was about presence, awareness, patience, and the ability to act with control and respect. That lesson stayed with him every day, guiding not only his practice of martial arts but also his interactions with others. For the employees, the lesson was equally profound. They had witnessed an ordinary man demonstrate extraordinary skill and humility. They had learned that appearances can be deceiving and that quiet strength often carries more weight than loud confidence. The janitor's actions reminded everyone that true respect is earned through patience, discipline, and integrity, not through showmanship or intimidation. In the weeks and months that followed, the janitor continued to inspire those around him. Employees came to him for guidance, not only in physical training but in life lessons. He offered advice about patience, observation, and thoughtful action. He encouraged others to practice humility, to respect the strengths of others, and to focus on self-improvement rather than comparison or competition. His lessons were simple, yet powerful, leaving a lasting impression on everyone he touched. The black belt, once confident and eager to show off, had become a dedicated student of the janitor's wisdom. He approached each day with humility, patience, and a renewed sense of purpose. He practiced not to impress, but to improve, not to dominate, but to learn. And in doing so, he carried forward the lessons of that unforgettable encounter, applying them not only to martial arts but to life itself. The janitor, meanwhile, continued his work quietly, maintaining the office with care and attention. He never sought recognition, never demanded praise, and never acted superior. Yet his impact was undeniable. Through his calm presence, quiet strength, and disciplined actions, he had transformed the office culture, inspired respect, and taught lessons that would remain long after the memory of the sparring match faded. And so, the story of that day became more than just an encounter between a black belt and a janitor. It became a story about patience, humility, respect, and the power of quiet strength. It became a lesson for everyone who witnessed it, that true mastery is not measured by outward displays, but by inner discipline, calm presence, and the ability to act with integrity and respect. The office continued to thrive, not just because of productivity, but because of the culture the janitor had helped to create. Employees carried the lessons they had learned into every interaction, every decision, and every challenge. And the black belt, transformed by the experience, shared those lessons quietly, reminding others that true strength lies not in arrogance or display, but in humility, patience, and the quiet mastery of oneself. The janitor returned to his work every day, unnoticed by many but revered by those who had truly seen him. His life continued quietly, yet his influence echoed loudly, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones who appear ordinary at first glance. And in that quiet, consistent presence, he left a legacy of wisdom, respect, and inspiration that would endure far beyond the walls of the office.